Hey, scrappy people! Tracy Reed here today, coming at you with Sketchy Sunday number 52, using the Island Time collection to scrapbook this photo of my husband and kids standing in front of a wall of surfboards. What better collection to scrapbook this page than the Island Time collection? So, the sketch has a lot of paper strips on it, which is really handy dandy for printables, especially if you don't have a 12 by 12 printer. So I took my 6 by 8 papers and I trimmed them down to various lengths and widths for this page, and now I'm just kind of seeing which order I want them in. This page also calls for some ribbons and some rickrack and also some stitching, so I'm going to be going all in on all of those things. So I'm just kind of trying to find some of these fibers that I have that will match this layout. There are 2 different pieces of rickrack and 2 different ribbons on this page, so I'm just kind of trying to find both. Of course, if you don't have rickrack and ribbons, you can just use other paper strips. You can use all ribbons, all rickrack. It doesn't really matter. It's just a guiding line in the sketch for you to add some fun texture to your page. Alright, so I think I've got everything picked out, so I'm going to start gluing all of these paper strips down. You can see that I printed out my journaling directly on my paper before I printed it. You can't really tell on camera, but this is the paper that has the light blue shakas in the back, the hand sign, the like hang 10 hand sign. So that really works with my photo as well. I'm going to add the green rickrack up here at the top. There isn't a lot of green represented on this page, so I wanted to bring in the green rickrack to sort of play off of some of the greens and some of the papers that I chose, and bring in that other color palette that other piece of the color palette, because when I use some of the die cuts from the collection, the stickers, I will be bringing in a little bit of green, so I'm adding some to the top of the page here, just using some liquid glue to hold that down. And then you can see that the paper strips are sort of staggered. They're not exactly straight, they're kind of wonky on the sketch, so the paper mats for the photo are also off-centered, wonky on the sketch, so I am making sure to layer those all together correctly. I am changing one thing from the original sketch, and my photo is vertical rather than horizontal, but it will still, or the rest of the sketch is exactly the same. I didn't even rotate the paper strips because I do like the way that the horizontal paper strips work with the paper strips at the top of the page, and I didn't want to change everything around, so I just changed the orientation of the photo. Okay, so I'm going to start putting the rest of these paper strips down. Mine end up a little bit more spaced out than the original, just because when I am going vertically, I want the paper strips to be sort of, you know, all the way under the photo. And if I had stacked them a little bit closer, like in the sketch itself, they wouldn't, like the top and the bottom of the photo would be hanging out with no paper strips, so I didn't want that. So they are a little bit more spaced out than the original. This rickrack is velvet and adhesive, so that was very handy dandy. I think it's from an old Stitcher's Twist December Daily collection, and it is very stuck. That's okay though, we wanted wonky. I don't know why I was trying to keep it straight, but wonky is fine. Next goes down the yellow paper. I kind of want to make sure that they are not evenly spaced down the vertical of, or not evenly spaced, but like they're staggered vertically and horizontally, so that some stick out the left side of the photo, some stick out the right side of the photo. I'm going to try this adhesive instead of glue for this one, and it holds it down pretty well. Next is pink, and I decided to replace one of the paper strips in the sketch with these surfboards. I mean, they are all in a row perfectly, just like the photo itself, so I couldn't resist. These are actually just the stickers from the collection that I moved close enough together that they would cut all as one piece. Even though my silhouette did crinkle it a little bit, that's okay, because I'm going to de-stress I'm going to de-stress. I'm going to distress the rest of the page, so the sort of wonky cut that the silhouette gave the surfboards won't be a big deal. You can see I'm even like flipping them up a little bit. All right, another fiber. Let's go with this yellow. I wanted to bring in a little bit more yellow for the page. I actually have quite a bit of yellow because I also have the photo mat, but I thought that the yellow would be a good contrast from all of the navy in the background and sort of brighten the whole thing up a little bit. One more paper strip. Perfect. Phew. Okay, so since my composition or my photo is now vertical, I have a little less vertical room for where I had the title on the page, so I'm going to have to adjust the sketch a little bit to work around my photo. And I just moved the title a little bit lower and a little bit to the right. First thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to add in my stitching, and I'm using an awl to punch holes where I want my stitching holes to be, and then off camera I will go ahead and use some embroidery floss to add in some decorative stitching. I could have brought in my sewing machine, but I'm just not a fan of busting out my sewing machine unless I have to. Also, I don't have a lot of multicolored threads. Actually, I don't have any. I only have white and black, and I wanted this to be colorful. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to commit to hand stitching. Now, I did lose the hand stitching that went over that blue, that last set of holes that I added, so I will be changing that up a little bit. Just picking out some colors that match. Teal, yellow, pink, and green. I'm going to put them in that order as well. So just some straight stitching across the page. You can see I'm already losing that pink stitching at the top. That's okay, I will fix it. I'm gonna pop up this photo on foam tape because I wanted some height on this page. But before I do that, I'm going to take my distressing tool and I'm going to go over all of these papers that are sticking out the edges, all of the paper strips, and also around the outside border of the page. I'm going to rough everything up, make it look nice and distressed. If you've ever been to a beach town, Oahu wasn't so bad, but if you've ever been to a coastal town, you'll know that everything is sort of rough around the edges from all of that ocean air. So I wanted to just sort of mimic that vibe a little bit, make it rough around the edges. I even tear some spots on the border or on the outside edge of the blue and fold over some tears just for fun. I think that adds a lot of visual interest to the page and it makes it more exciting and interesting because it is visual interest. Makes it more interesting and exciting to look at. Just gives your eyes a little bit more eye candy to focus on. Alright, now I'm going to pop up this page or this photo on the page with the foam tape. Then I can start adding my clusters to the page. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and get started with my title, making sure that that has a good place on the page. But first I need to go ahead and glue these multiple copies of each letter together. This is kind of how I make a faux thicker. So I'm just using liquid glue and squishing them together, and it gives them a thickness and makes them have a little bit more depth. I did this in a previous layout too. Actually, I do this quite often. You don't actually have to print 3 different copies like I did. You can just cut on white paper 2 extra copies. But since I was doing a print and cut and I had extra room on the page, I went ahead and just printed 3 copies. So it says surfs up, my little apostrophe needed as well. Perfect. I'm gonna let those dry for a minute and start my actual clusters. The title's gonna go at the bottom. So I've selected some of the stickers from the collection to just sort of put around the outside edges of my photo and other places on the layout where it calls for it on the sketch. I stick pretty true to the sketch other than using a vertical photo. So I mean, I made the sketch, which means I like the sketch. So there was no reason for me to diverge from it. Gonna use some little flowers as placeholders. Sorry, I'm a little low on the camera here. Just putting it at the bottom edge, like on the template. Template. Sketch, that's what I meant. I'm still using all this digital lingo even though this is a paper layout. I don't want to cover up Joe's face, so I put that flower strategically right next to him. And of course I had to include the waves since we were going surfing, or they were going surfing at least. We're going to use good vibes. The top says, "Don't worry, be happy." I will take some foam tape and pop up anything that's hanging over the edges of the photo so that it has some support. But first I'm just going to use some liquid glue just to make it stay there for a minute. Then I realized I forgot to grab a couple of things, like this Hawaiian shirt that matches my husband's Hawaiian shirt perfectly, which is so funny because I actually designed this line before he bought that shirt. He found it at a thrift store, and you can't see from here, but it's actually the Joker and Batman surfing. Really vintage looking, you know, vintage comic book looking, so it was kind of funny. I had to include the surf shirt. Okay, I'm going to put down all of these letters. They do not want to stick very well because there's so much texture going on, so I'm going to wiggle them around quite a bit. But we get there eventually. You can see them just moving around. So I'm also going to take the rest of this embroidery floss that I have left over from trimming it from the needle, and I'm going to create more texture with some string clumps. And I'm going to strategically place them kind of, some of them are going to go where the stitching that matches is, but some of them are just going to go on other places on the page that I feel like there was some weird blank spots, like over here, but you know, that is still touching the stitching that is the matching color. I'm trying to make sure that it's close enough. Still moving around those letters. So you can see I lost the pink stitching. I've covered it up. That's okay. I cut off a little snippet of the string that I had left over, and I'm going to put it back. I'm going to stitch on the other side of that photo so that it's over here by this pink knot that I'm adding. And then last but not least, we have the green. Just kind of pulling the strands apart and creating a clump rather than a solid string. Again, visually interesting, adds some neat texture, and also doesn't make my string go to waste. So I always love that. I hate wasting things. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pop up these things that are hanging off the edge because everything seems to be pretty dry now. Then I will take some liquid glue and make sure that the string stays in place as well. Just gluing underneath there, putting a nice glob of glue in between the string and the paper, very haphazardly. This is not a science. I want it to stay there, but I want it to have movement still as well. Okay, I'm gonna get my awl back out and I'm gonna make some holes for the stitching, and I will spare you watching me stitch on camera again. Perfect. The last thing I'm going to do is add in some enamel dots from my stash. I pulled out some yellow ones and I use the entire sheet, which makes me super duper happy. You can see how many enamel dots I have, so I like using up as many as possible on a layout without making it look too cluttered, of course. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe. I would love to have you. If you don't already, you can follow me over on Instagram. I'm at Tracy M. Reed. I'd love to see you over there as well. There's a link in the description box below to the blog post for this sketch, which includes a free printable PDF download if you want to print it off and use it for your own inspiration. And I will see you next time. Thank you.